There were 3 things Kaelith Moonwhisper knew with absolute certainty on the morning she buried her father. First, that funerals in the dead of winter were brutally cold. Second, that being an Omega without a pack made you invisible to everyone except creditors. And third, that kneeling in the frozen mud, saying goodbye to her father, felt like the heaviest moment she could have imagined. She knelt before the freshly turned earth at the edge of the Whispering Grove, a small clearing on the outskirts of pack territory, where wolves who died without status were buried. No ceremony, no pack mourners, no songs of passing. Just Kaelith, a simple wooden marker she'd carved herself, and the suffocating weight of being completely, utterly alone. The cold was vicious, the kind that didn't just chill but invaded, seeping through her threadbare cloak and settling into her bones like it planned to stay forever. Each breath burned in her lungs, and her fingers had gone numb hours ago, so deeply frozen that she couldn't feel the earth beneath her palms anymore. The wind cut through the clearing like thin blades of ice, and somewhere in the distance, a crow cawed, a lonely, harsh sound that perfectly matched the desolation pressing down on her chest. Her father had been a good man. Not powerful, not influential, not the kind of wolf who commanded attention when he entered a room. Just a craftsman who'd made beautiful things with his hands and had loved his daughter with quiet, steady devotion, even when the pack whispered that she was weak, defective, an Omega, whose wolf was too small to matter. "I'm sorry I couldn't afford the proper rites," Kaelith whispered, her breath fogging in the bitter air as she pressed her bare hands against the frozen earth. Around her neck she wore the only thing of value she owned, a pendant her father had made, carved from white stone in the shape of a crescent moon. Her fingers found it instinctively, gripping the cool stone like an anchor. "I'm sorry about so many things." She'd spent the last 5 years watching her father's health decline, his strength fading, his spirit dimming, until he was simply too tired to keep going, while the pack offered nothing but distant sympathy and helpful suggestions about accepting one's place in the natural order. Omegas weren't expected to rise above their station, weren't expected to ask for resources or attention, weren't seen as important beyond their role in pack life. Kaelith had tried so hard to change that reality anyway, had worked 3 jobs simultaneously, cleaning houses, mending clothes, organizing storage rooms for merchants who paid her in coins so small they were barely worth counting, had begged the pack healers for charity care, had researched every herb and remedy she could find, had prayed to the moon goddess with desperate, furious intensity, and none of it had made any difference. "I don't know what to do now," Kaelith admitted to the grave, her voice cracking around the edges. "Everyone says I should accept the bond with Garrett, that it's my best option for survival, that Omegas without family protection don't last long on their own." Garrett Shadowpaw was a mid-ranking warrior who'd expressed interest in claiming Kaelith as his mate, not because he loved her, he'd been very clear about that, but because he wanted a mate, and she was suitable enough for pack expectations. It was the best offer he could make within the limitations of his own position, and the pack elders had encouraged the match with enthusiasm that felt more like pressure. After all, what else was a lone Omega going to do? She should be grateful someone wanted her at all. The thought of accepting Garrett's cold, transactional offer made Kaelith want to scream. But the alternative was trying to survive alone in a world that had very little patience for wolves without pack protection, especially Omega wolves who everyone considered weak by default. "Tell me what to do," Kaelith whispered, her voice cracking. "Please, I need to know there's a future for me beyond just going through the motions and accepting that this is all my life will ever be." The wind died suddenly, so abruptly that the silence felt heavy and expectant, like the forest itself was holding its breath. Kaelith opened her eyes, blinking away tears, and froze. At the edge of the clearing, barely visible through the winter bare trees, stood a wolf. Not a shifter in wolf form, an actual wolf. Pure white, massive, with eyes that gleamed like molten silver in the weak afternoon light. It watched her with an intensity that made the hair on the back of her neck stand up, every instinct screaming that this was no ordinary creature. Kaelith's heart began to pound so hard she could feel it in her throat. Her breath came faster, fogging the air between them. The temperature seemed to drop even further, and there was a pressure building in the atmosphere, a weight of something ancient and powerful stirring in the space around her. The white wolf didn't move, didn't approach, just stood there, watching her with that unnerving, intelligent gaze that seemed to look straight through her skin and into something deeper. And then, as though the first wolf had been a signal, more shapes emerged from the forest. One white wolf became 2. 2 became 5. 5 became 10. Kaelith's breath caught in her throat as she slowly got to her feet, mud and snow clinging to her worn dress. Her legs trembled, from cold, from shock, from the sheer impossibility of what she was witnessing. She counted them with growing disbelief as they arranged themselves in a semicircle around the small clearing, each one identical to the first. Pure white fur, silver eyes, size that suggested they were far more than simple forest creatures. By the time they stopped appearing, there were 20 of them, standing perfectly still in formation, like an honor guard attending a ceremony meant for royalty. 20 white wolves, watching her with eyes that held far too much awareness to be natural. The air hummed with power now, a sensation that made Kaelith's small, supposedly defective Omega Wolf sit up inside her and pay attention with an intensity she'd never felt before. Magic. Ancient magic that smelled like winter storms and moonlight and promises older than memory. Kaelith's mind raced through possibilities, each one more impossible than the last. White wolves were legend. Creatures from old stories that her father used to tell her about ancient magic and debts that transcended death. Except, there were 20 massive white wolves currently standing in a frozen clearing, arranged around her father's grave like they'd come for a very specific purpose. One of the wolves, the largest one standing at the center of the formation, stepped forward. As it moved, the air around it began to shimmer, like heat waves rising from summer ground, except this was winter, and the shimmer was made of moonlight and silver mist. Kaelith's eyes watered, trying to follow the transformation. The wolf's form blurred, stretched, reformed, bones shifting, fur receding, shape changing in ways that should have been impossible but were happening right in front of her. And then, where the wolf had been, stood a man. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with hair as white as the wolf's fur that fell past his collar, in a way that should have looked strange, but instead looked striking. His eyes remained that same molten silver, and his features were sharp and handsome in a way that suggested nobility and power and danger all woven together. He wore dark leather clothing that looked both practical and expensive, and moved with the unconscious grace of someone who'd never doubted their right to occupy space. But it was the sensation rolling off him that made Kaelith's knees weak. Pure, overwhelming alpha power that pressed against her senses like a physical weight. Not just any alpha. An alpha king. Kaelith took an instinctive step back, her hand flying to her father's pendant again. "Kaelith Moonwhisper," the man said, his voice deep and rough around the edges in a way that sent shivers down her spine. It wasn't a question. He knew exactly who she was. Daughter of Marcus Moonwhisper, craftsman and debt holder. Kaelith's throat had gone completely dry. She managed to nod, not trusting herself to speak without her voice shaking. The Alpha King studied her for a long moment, his silver eyes taking in her threadbare cloak, her mud-stained dress, the exhaustion that probably showed in every line of her body. Then he looked down at her father's grave with an expression that might have been respect. "Your father saved my life 30 years ago," he said quietly. The words hung in the frozen air between them. Kaelith blinked, her mind struggling to process this new information. "He never," she whispered. "He never told me." "No," the Alpha King agreed, something like understanding flickering across his face. "He wouldn't have. Your father wasn't the kind of man who kept records of good deeds for future bargaining." He paused, then continued. "I was young then, barely into my alpha power, tracking a rogue hunter who'd been terrorizing pack members across territories. Your father found me half dead from poisoned wounds." Kaelith's hand tightened around the pendant, her father's final gift. "He dragged me to his workshop," the Alpha King continued, "and spent 3 days nursing me back to health. He never asked for payment, never demanded anything in return, just helped because it was the right thing to do. His silver eyes found hers again, and there was something fierce in them now, something that looked like determination. When I tried to repay him, your father asked for only one thing, a promise. He said that if he or his daughter ever needed help, real, desperate help, I would come, that I would honor a debt that couldn't be measured in gold or favors. His voice dropped lower. He called in that debt an hour before he died. The words hit Kaelith like a physical blow. Her legs wobbled and she had to lock her knees to keep from collapsing. What? Your father sent word through old channels, methods of communication most wolves have forgotten exist. He said his daughter would be alone, unprotected, vulnerable to wolves who would take advantage of her situation. The Alpha King took a careful step closer, moving slowly like he was approaching something precious and breakable. He asked me to honor my promise, to help you when you needed it most. Another step. The power radiating from him intensified, but somehow it didn't feel threatening. It felt protective, like a shield being offered rather than a weapon being raised. So, here I am, he said simply, with my pack, the White Guard, sworn to honor debts that transcend normal pack law. I've come to fulfill the promise I made to your father 30 years ago. Kaelith's mind was spinning, trying to catch up with information that seemed to come from an entirely different reality than the one she'd been living in 5 minutes ago. I don't understand. What kind of help are you offering? The kind that changes everything, the Alpha King said. Protection, resources, a place in my territory where you won't have to fear being claimed by wolves who see you as lesser. Your father was very specific about what he wanted for you. Safety, respect, and the freedom to choose your own path. He paused, and something flickered in those silver eyes that might have been sympathy. I know what your pack thinks of you, Kaelith Moonwhisper. I know they see a weak Omega whose wolf is too small to matter, but your father saw something different. He saw strength that had never been tested properly, wisdom that came from surviving in a world that tried to break you, and the potential to be extraordinary if someone finally gave you the chance. Tears burned behind Kaelith's eyes again, but this time they weren't just grief. They were something more complicated, hope and disbelief, and desperate, terrified, wanting all tangled together. Why would you do this? She whispered. A debt repaid doesn't usually involve... She gestured vaguely at the 20 white wolves still standing in perfect formation. All of this. Because your father saved my life when no one else would have, the Alpha King said. Because I made a promise, and I don't break promises. And because... He hesitated, and for the first time since appearing, he looked almost uncertain. Because my wolf recognized something in you the moment I saw you kneeling here. Something that matters more than Omega status. What? Kaelith asked, though part of her wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. The Alpha King's mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile, but wasn't quite not a smile either. That's something we can discuss after you're not kneeling in frozen mud and at risk of losing fingers to frostbite. Will you accept my help, Kaelith Moonwhisper? Will you let me honor the debt I owe your father by giving you the protection and choices he wanted you to have? Kaelith looked around the clearing, at her father's simple grave, at the 20 impossible white wolves, at the Alpha King who'd appeared like something out of a story she'd stopped believing in. Behind her, invisible but present, was the pack that had never valued her. The life of survival and compromise and slow suffocation that waited if she returned. And before her was an Alpha King offering something that sounded too good to be true, which meant it probably was too good to be true. Which meant accepting was either the bravest or stupidest thing she'd ever done. What's your name? She heard herself ask. Because if she was going to make a life-altering decision based on impossible circumstances, she should at least know who she was dealing with. The Alpha King's almost smile became slightly more defined. Malrik Winterborne, King of the Northern Reach, leader of the White Guard, and apparently the wolf Destiny decided to send to a frozen clearing in the dead of winter to fulfill a 30-year-old promise. Despite everything, the grief, the cold, the absolute insanity of the situation, Kaelith felt a small laugh bubble up from somewhere deep in her chest. That's quite a title. It's a lot of responsibility and very little free time, Malrik agreed. But it comes with excellent benefits, including the ability to dramatically rescue Omegas with 20 magical wolves. Very theatrical. I've been told I have a flair for the dramatic. The last part was said with such deadpan delivery that Kaelith couldn't tell if he was joking or completely serious, which somehow made it funnier. All right, she heard herself say, the words emerging before her rational mind could stop them. I accept your help, Malrik Winterborne. Whatever that help involves. Something fierce and warm flashed through Malrik's silver eyes. Then let's get you somewhere warm before you lose toes to frostbite. We can discuss the details once you're not hypothermic and grieving. He held out his hand, bare despite the winter cold, strong and certain. Kaelith looked at it for a long moment. This offered connection from an Alpha King to an Omega everyone considered worthless. Then she placed her muddy, frozen hand in his. The warmth that spread from that touch was immediate and shocking, like being wrapped in sunlight after years in shadow. It flooded through her entire body, chasing away the bone-deep cold that had settled into her over the past brutal hours. Behind them, the 19 other white wolves began to howl, not threatening, but welcoming. Like they were singing a song of recognition, of debt honored, of something beginning that had been waiting 30 years to start. The sound rose into the winter sky, beautiful and haunting and full of promise. And Kaelith Moonwhisper, Omega without a pack and daughter of a craftsman who'd saved a king, took her first step toward a future she'd never imagined possible. She had absolutely no idea what came next, but for the first time in 5 brutal years, she wasn't facing it alone. The journey from the small burial clearing to wherever Malrik was taking her happened in a blur of sensory overload that Kaelith's exhausted brain struggled to process. One moment she was standing in frozen mud holding an Alpha King's hand. The next moment the world shifted, not painfully, but strangely, like reality had briefly forgotten which direction was up, and suddenly they were somewhere else entirely. Kaelith's stomach did a complicated flip that suggested it was deeply unhappy about the sudden relocation. She swayed on her feet, and Malrik's grip on her hand tightened, steadying her before she could embarrass herself by face-planting in front of what appeared to be several dozen witnesses. Easy, he murmured. Moon road travel takes adjustment if you're not used to it. The nausea passes in a few seconds. Moon road, Kaelith repeated weakly, her free hand pressed against her stomach. You just casually transported us through magical pathways like that's a completely normal Thursday activity. It's actually more of a Tuesday activity, a new voice interjected with dry amusement. Thursdays are reserved for dramatically appearing in throne rooms and making pompous visiting dignitaries nervous. Completely different energy. Kaelith's vision cleared enough to focus on the speaker. A woman in her late 30s with dark hair pulled back in a practical braid and sharp brown eyes that were currently assessing Kaelith with the intensity of someone conducting a rapid inventory of structural damage. She wore leather armor that looked functional rather than decorative, and stood with the confident posture of someone who could absolutely end you in combat, but would prefer to mock you verbally first. This is Vera Blackthorn, Malrik said, releasing Kaelith's hand slowly, though he stayed close enough to catch her if her legs decided to give up entirely. My second in command, chief strategist, and the person who will definitely have opinions about unexpected guests. So many opinions, Vera confirmed cheerfully, circling Kaelith like a predator assessing prey. Starting with, she's hypothermic, exhausted, probably hasn't eaten properly in days, and looks like she's about 3 seconds from either collapsing or bolting for the nearest exit. Excellent rescue timing, Your Majesty. Very dramatic entrance with the 20 white wolves. I give it a 9 out of 10 for theatrical impact. Only 9? Malrik asked, sounding genuinely offended. I thought the synchronized howling at the end really elevated the whole performance. The howling was good, I'll grant you that, Vera conceded. But you lost points for not warning her about moon road travel. She has that "my internal organs just rearrange themselves" expression. Rookie mistake. I was focused on the dramatic rescue, Malrik defended. You can't expect me to remember every small detail like warn people before magically transporting them across vast distances. That's literally the most important detail, Vera countered. That's like serving someone dinner and forgetting to mention the food is still on fire. Despite everything, the shock, the exhaustion, the surreal nature of watching an Alpha King bicker with his second-in-command about rescue protocol ratings, Kaelith felt a laugh bubble up from somewhere deep in her chest. It came out slightly hysterical, but it was genuine. Both Malrik and Vera paused their debate to look at her. "Sorry," Kaelith managed, pressing her hand over her mouth. "It's just, I buried my father this morning. I was kneeling in frozen mud, contemplating whether accepting a loveless bond was my only option for survival. And now I'm watching an Alpha King and his terrifying second-in-command argue about the quality of my magical kidnapping like it's a performance that deserves critical review." "You weren't kidnapped," Malrik said quickly. "You agreed to accept my help. That's completely different. Legally distinct," Vera agreed. "Very important distinction for future documentation. I'm having the strangest day of my entire life," Kaelith said faintly. "It's about to get stranger," Vera announced, gesturing broadly at their surroundings. "Welcome to Winterkeep, home of the Northern Reach Pack, where apparently we're now in the business of rescuing hypothermic omegas. Let me give you the abbreviated tour before you pass out from exhaustion." For the first time since arriving, Kaelith actually looked around at where Malrik had brought her. They stood in a massive courtyard surrounded by stone buildings that managed to look both ancient and immaculately maintained. Snow covered everything in pristine white layers, but paths had been cleared with precision that suggested serious organizational commitment. Torches burned in iron brackets along the walls, casting warm light against the evening darkness that had somehow replaced afternoon while they weren't looking. The architecture was a mix of practical functionality and striking beauty. Carved stone archways, wooden doors reinforced with iron, windows that glowed with firelight from within. And everywhere, absolutely everywhere, there were wolves. Not the white wolves from the clearing, though Kaelith spotted a few of those in their shifted forms lounging near doorways like extremely large magical guard dogs. Regular wolves in every color imaginable. Gray, black, brown, russet, silver. Some in human form, some shifted, all of them moving with purpose through the courtyard like this was the most normal evening they'd ever experienced. Several of them glanced at Kaelith, did visible double-takes at seeing their king holding hands with a muddy, underdressed stranger, then quickly found other things to be very interested in, while definitely not staring. "Ignore them," Vera said, noticing Kaelith's growing awareness of being the center of attention. "They're all desperately curious, but too well trained to actually approach without permission. You'll be the subject of intense gossip for approximately 3 days until someone does something more interesting, like accidentally setting the training grounds on fire again." "Again?" Kaelith asked weakly. "Marcus has a real problem with controlling his fire shifting," Vera said with the air of someone discussing a recurring minor inconvenience. "We've banned him from practicing near anything flammable, but he has a very loose interpretation of what counts as flammable. Last week he argued that, technically snow is water, so it should cancel out fire, which is not how elemental magic works. Snow is definitely not a fire suppressant when Marcus is involved," Malrik agreed. "He managed to melt through 3 feet of it and set a wooden storage shed ablaze. Very impressive in the worst possible way." The casual conversation about pack members and their various disasters was so normal, so domestic, that Kaelith felt something tight in her chest begin to loosen. This wasn't what she'd expected from an Alpha King's territory. She'd imagined something cold and formal, rigid hierarchy, strict protocols, everyone walking on eggshells around their powerful leader. Instead, she was listening to Malrik and Vera discuss a pack member's fire-related incompetence like fond parents talking about a well-meaning but chaotic family member. "Can you walk?" Vera asked Kaelith directly, her tone shifting from amused to practical. "Or do you need someone to carry you? No judgment either way. Hypothermia affects balance, and you've had an extremely weird day." "I can walk," Kaelith said, though her legs chose that exact moment to prove her wrong by wobbling in a way that suggested walking was more aspirational goal than current capability. Malrik moved instantly, his hand on her elbow providing steady support. The warmth from his touch spread through her arm, chasing away some of the bone-deep cold that still lingered despite the magical transportation. Bath, food, warm clothes, sleep. In that order, he said to Vera. Guest quarters in the East Wing. Make sure she has everything she needs and that no one bothers her tonight. She needs recovery time, not curious pack members asking 75 questions about how she knows me. I know how to handle refugees, Your Majesty, Vera said, but her tone was fond rather than offended. I've been doing this longer than you've been king. Come on, little Omega. Let's get you defrosted before you turn into an ice sculpture. That would be tragic and would really bring down the aesthetic of the courtyard. She started walking toward one of the buildings, clearly expecting Kaelith to follow. Malrik gave Kaelith's elbow a gentle squeeze. You're safe here, he said quietly, his silver eyes serious. I know everything is overwhelming and strange right now, but I meant what I said at your father's grave. You're under my protection. That means no one here will hurt you or force you into anything you don't want. Take time to recover, to process, to figure out what you need. We can discuss everything else when you're warm and fed, and not at risk of medical complications from exposure. Kaelith wanted to say something appropriate, something gracious and composed that would make her sound like less of a disaster. Instead, she managed, "Thank you," which came out embarrassingly wobbly. Malrik's expression softened in a way that made him look less like an intimidating alpha king and more like someone who genuinely cared about her well-being. Your father saved my life. This is the least I can do to honor his memory. Now go with Vera before she starts lecturing me about proper protocol for traumatized guests. I'm absolutely going to lecture you about that later, Vera called over her shoulder. You get a full presentation with visual aids about the proper way to warn people before magical transportation. It's going to be extremely tedious and you're going to sit through the whole thing. Looking forward to it, Malrik said dryly, though there was affection in his voice. Kaelith followed Vera across the courtyard, acutely aware of the curious glances from pack members they passed. But no one approached, no one demanded explanations, and several wolves actually nodded respectfully as they walked by, acknowledging her presence without making her feel threatened or unwelcome. The walk through Winterkeep was a blur of stone corridors, warm firelight, and the ambient sounds of pack life. Conversations drifting from rooms they passed, laughter from a communal space, someone singing a melody that sounded ancient and beautiful. It was overwhelming in ways Kaelith hadn't expected, because her old pack had never felt this alive, this connected, this much like an actual community, instead of just wolves living in proximity. Here we are, Vera announced, pushing open a heavy wooden door to reveal a chamber that was larger than the entire home Kaelith had shared with her father. The room was dominated by a massive bed with thick furs and blankets that looked impossibly comfortable. A fireplace crackled with fresh logs, filling the space with warmth that made Kaelith's frozen skin sting. There was a bathing area visible through an archway, steam already rising from what looked like a large copper tub. And near the window sat a table laden with food. Bread, cheese, roasted meat, fruits that must have cost a fortune in winter, and what appeared to be some kind of chocolate pastry that made Kaelith's stomach growl audibly. Bath first, Vera said firmly, already moving toward the bathing area and testing the water temperature with her hand. It's hot but not scalding. Stay in until you stop shivering and your fingers look less like frozen carrots. There's soap, herbs for sore muscles, clean towels. Take your time. No one's going to rush you. She paused in the archway, her expression turning serious. I'm going to station myself right outside your door, not to keep you prisoner. You can leave whenever you want, though I'd strongly advise against it until you're no longer hypothermic. But some of our pack members are intensely curious, and you don't need a parade of well-meaning wolves asking if you're the king's new mate or his long-lost sister or some kind of prophesied chosen one. People love making up dramatic backstories for mysterious arrivals. Am I? Kaelith heard herself ask. His mate, I mean. He said his wolf recognized something in me. Vera's expression shifted to something that might have been sympathy. That's a conversation you need to have with Malrik, not me. But I will say this. He doesn't do dramatic magical rescues for just anyone. In the 15 years I've served as his second, I've never seen him use the White Guard for anything except fulfilling ancient debts or stopping genuine threats. So whatever his wolf recognized in you, it matters. A lot. She moved toward the door, then paused with her hand on the frame. Get warm. Eat something. Sleep. Tomorrow morning we can start figuring out what happens next. But tonight, you're just a guest who needs recovery. Nothing more complicated than that. Sound good? Kaelith nodded, not trusting herself to speak without her voice cracking. Good, Vera said. Yell if you need anything. And I mean, literally, yell. I'll hear you. These old walls carry sound really well, which is excellent for emergency communication and terrible for private conversations. Welcome to Winterkeep, Little Omega. Try not to freeze to death in your first 12 hours. That would make Malrik very sad and would reflect poorly on my hospitality management skills. Then she left, closing the door gently behind her, and Kaelith was alone for the first time since kneeling at her father's grave. The bathwater was possibly the best thing that had ever happened to Kaelith's abused body. She sank into the copper tub with a sound that was embarrassingly close to a moan, feeling heat seep into muscles that had been clenched against cold for so long she'd forgotten what relaxation felt like. The herbs Vera had mentioned filled the air with a scent that was part pine forest, part wildflowers, and part something else she couldn't identify, but that made her entire body feel like it was being wrapped in warm, magical cotton. Steam rose around her in gentle clouds, and for the first time in what felt like years, Kaelith allowed herself to simply exist, without constantly calculating survival strategies or worrying about the next crisis. Her father was gone. That reality still pressed against her chest like a stone, heavy and immovable. But she was alive, she was warm, and she was in the territory of an alpha king who'd appeared with 20 magical wolves to honor a debt her father had earned by being exactly who he'd always been. Someone who helped because it was right, not because it was profitable. The tears came without warning, spilling down her cheeks and mixing with the bathwater. Kaelith cried for her father, for the 5 brutal years of watching him fade, for the loneliness that had carved itself into her bones, and for the overwhelming strangeness of having hope again when she'd convinced herself hope was a luxury she couldn't afford. By the time she finally emerged from the bath, pruned, pink-skinned, and significantly less frozen, her eyes were puffy, but her chest felt lighter, like crying had released some of the pressure that had been building for months. Clean clothes had been laid out on the bed while she was bathing. Not fancy court dress or anything that screamed Alpha King's territory, just soft wool leggings, a tunic in deep forest green, and undergarments that actually fit properly. There was even a thick robe made from fur so soft it felt like petting a cloud. Kaelith dressed quickly, braided her damp hair to keep it out of her face, and turned her attention to the table of food with the focus of someone who'd been surviving on minimal rations for far too long. She'd intended to eat slowly, to maintain some dignity while consuming what was clearly meant to be a feast. That plan lasted approximately 30 seconds before hunger overrode pride, and she started eating like someone who'd forgotten food could taste this good. The bread was fresh and warm, the cheese was sharp and creamy, the meat was seasoned with herbs that made her taste buds very happy, and the chocolate pastry was possibly the best thing she'd ever put in her mouth. She ate until her stomach stopped making angry noises and started making contented ones, then ate a little more because the pastry deserved to be fully appreciated. By the time she collapsed into the massive bed, which was even more comfortable than it looked, Kaelith was warm, fed, and so exhausted that consciousness felt like a distant memory. Her last thought before sleep claimed her was that tomorrow she'd have to figure out what being under the protection of an Alpha King actually meant. But tonight, she was just going to sleep in the softest bed she'd ever experienced and pretend that life made sense. Morning arrived with pale winter sunlight streaming through the window and the sound of someone knocking on her door with the confident rhythm of a person who had no intention of being ignored. Little Omega, Vera's voice called through the wood. I'm coming in with breakfast in approximately 10 seconds. If you're not decent, now would be the time to mention that. Kaelith sat up, disoriented and tangled in furs. I'm decent. The door opened and Vera swept in, carrying a tray laden with more food than one person could reasonably eat in a single meal. She was followed by a second woman who looked to be in her early 20s, with vibrant red hair pulled into multiple braids and an expression of barely contained excitement. "This is Senna," Vera announced, setting the tray on the table. "She's one of our scouts, has absolutely no sense of personal boundaries, and insisted on meeting you immediately because, and I quote, an Omega who made the king do a dramatic magical rescue is definitely someone interesting." Senna waved enthusiastically. "Hi, I heard you arrived via Moon Road travel, which means you probably spent half the night wondering if your internal organs were still in the right configuration. How's your stomach? Still feel like it's trying to escape through your throat?" "It's better?" Kaelith managed, still processing the fact that she'd gone from sleeping peacefully to having two wolves in her room discussing her digestive system. "Excellent," Senna said, dropping into one of the chairs with the casual confidence of someone completely comfortable in her own skin. "So here's the thing. Everyone is dying to know who you are and why King Malrik showed up yesterday with you and his entire white guard looking all mysterious and dramatic. But Vera threatened to assign extra patrol shifts to anyone who bothered you before you'd had breakfast and proper orientation." "I did threaten that," Vera confirmed, "and I'll follow through. I have no problem making people regret their nosiness." "So I volunteered to be your official welcome committee," Senna continued, grinning, "because I'm genuinely curious, but also because I'm very good at translating Winterkeep culture for newcomers. This place has a lot of unspoken rules that can be confusing if you don't know what you're looking at." Kaelith found herself smiling despite her lingering disorientation. Senna's energy was infectious, the kind of warm, genuine friendliness that didn't feel forced or like it came with hidden expectations. "What kind of unspoken rules?" she asked. "Oh, so many," Senna said, leaning forward conspiratorially. "For example, if Marcus offers to show you his controlled fire demonstration, say no. It's never controlled. He set himself on fire at least 6 times this month. We've started keeping a tally board in the training grounds." 7 times, Vera corrected. "He did it again yesterday while you were on patrol. Burned off both eyebrows. He looks extremely surprised all the time now." Senna snorted. "That explains why he was avoiding me at breakfast. Anyway, other important rules. Don't arm wrestle Thorn unless you want a broken wrist. He doesn't know his own strength and feels terrible about it afterward. Don't ask Alara about her medicinal herb garden because it'll turn into a 4-hour lecture with visual demonstrations. And definitely don't play cards with Vera because she cheats." "I don't cheat," Vera said with the practiced innocence of someone who absolutely cheated. "I'm just extremely skilled at reading tells and managing probability." "You marked the cards," Senna accused. "Strategic preparation," Vera countered. "Completely different from cheating." Despite everything, the strangeness of her situation, the uncertainty of her future, the grief still sitting heavy in her chest, Kaelith laughed. Actually laughed, the sound bubbling up from somewhere genuine. "See?" Senna said triumphantly. "She's laughing. That means my welcome committee strategy is working. Vera said you looked like you needed friendly chaos instead of formal protocol. I said she looked like she needed to not feel like a specimen being studied," Vera clarified. "But yes, friendly chaos is an acceptable translation." A knock on the door interrupted their conversation. All 3 women turned to look as Malrik's voice came from the hallway. "Is the friendly chaos committee finished overwhelming my guest, or should I come back later?" "Come in," Vera called. "We're at a very manageable level of chaos. Barely overwhelming at all." Malrik entered, and Kaelith's breath caught slightly because he looked different in morning light. Less like an otherworldly alpha king, and more like an actual person. He wore simple dark clothing. His white hair was pulled back in a practical tie, and his silver eyes held something that might have been amusement as he took in the scene. "I see Senna has already adopted you," he observed. "She does this with every newcomer. Last month she adopted a visiting merchant and gave him a 3-hour tour of Winterkeep that somehow ended with them stuck on the roof of the armory. That was one time, Senna protested. And technically, we weren't stuck. We just couldn't figure out how to get down without Marcus's help. And he was busy being on fire. He's always busy being on fire, Vera muttered. Malrik's mouth twitched in what might have been a suppressed smile. Could I have a few minutes to speak with Kaelith? Privately? I promised to return her to the Friendly Chaos Committee afterward. We'll be right outside, Senna said, bouncing to her feet. Planning your full orientation schedule. It's going to be very thorough. Possibly too thorough. Definitely overwhelming. Looking forward to it, Kaelith said, surprised to realize she meant it. Vera and Senna left, and suddenly the room felt quieter, more intimate. Malrik stayed near the door, giving her space. How are you feeling? He asked. Actually feeling, not what you think you should say to be polite. Kaelith considered the question. Confused? Overwhelmed? Less cold? Better fed than I've been in months? Uncertain about what happens next? Grateful, but also suspicious that this is too good to be true and will somehow collapse into disaster. That's honest, Malrik said. Thank you. Most people try to tell me what they think I want to hear. I'm too tired to figure out what you want to hear, Kaelith admitted. So you're getting honesty by default. That earned her an actual smile. Brief but genuine. I'll take it. I came to discuss next steps, but I want to make something clear first. You're not a prisoner here. You're not obligated to stay, to participate in pack life, or to fulfill any expectations. The debt I owed your father was about giving you choices, not about trapping you in a new set of obligations. He paused, his silver eyes serious. That said, I'd like to offer you a place here. Not as a servant, not as some kind of token Omega. As a member of the Northern Reach Pack with full rights and protection, you'd have your own space, resources, and the freedom to figure out what you want your life to look like now that you're not just surviving day to day. Kaelith's throat tightened. Why would you do that? Because my wolf recognized something in you, Malrik said quietly. Something that matters. And because I think you're exactly the kind of person this pack needs, someone who's survived impossible circumstances and came out stronger instead of bitter. You don't know that I'm not bitter, Kaelith pointed out. You laughed with Senna and Vera, Malrik said. People who are truly bitter don't laugh that easily. They might fake it, but what I heard was genuine. That's rare. That's valuable. He moved closer, but stopped a respectful distance away. Take your time. Explore Winterkeep. Meet the pack. Figure out if this is somewhere you could see yourself belonging. And if the answer is no, I'll help you establish yourself wherever you want to go. No judgment, no punishment. Just honoring the promise I made to your father. Kaelith looked at him. This powerful alpha king who'd appeared like something from a story, who spoke about choices and respect like they mattered more than hierarchy. What did your wolf recognize? She asked. You keep mentioning it, but you haven't explained what it actually means. Malrik's expression shifted to something complicated. Wonder mixed with uncertainty, mixed with something that looked almost like hope. That, he said slowly, is something I'm still trying to understand myself. The orientation tour that Senna promised turned out to be less professional introduction to pack facilities and more chaotic sprint through Winterkeep with enthusiastic commentary about everyone's embarrassing secrets. That's the training grounds, Senna announced, gesturing to a large open area where several wolves in human form were sparring with various levels of competence. We practice combat, shifting control, and, oh look, there's Marcus trying to demonstrate fire manipulation again. Someone should probably stop him before he burns off his remaining facial hair. Kaelith watched as a tall man with singed eyebrows attempted to create what was apparently supposed to be a controlled flame in his palm. Instead, the fire immediately spread to his sleeve, and 3 other pack members rushed to tackle him into a convenient snowbank. 7.5 times now, Vera noted, appearing at Kaelith's other side. She'd materialized like a particularly judgmental ghost, armed with a small notebook where she made a tally mark. I'm counting the sleeve incident as half because he put it out faster than usual. Personal growth, Senna said solemnly. Soon he'll only set himself on fire once per week. Ambitious goal, Vera agreed. They continued walking, and Kaelith found herself relaxing into the strange rhythm of Winterkeep life. Pack members they passed nodded greetings, some curious, some friendly. All of them remarkably normal despite living in an Alpha King's territory. She'd expected rigid formality, stern warriors, and an atmosphere of barely contained danger. Instead, she was watching someone's fire incident get tallied in a notebook while other pack members placed bets on how long until the next one. "That's the healer's building," Senna continued, pointing to a stone structure with herbs hanging in the windows. "Ilara runs it. She's brilliant, but will talk your ear off about medicinal properties if you give her any encouragement. I once asked about headache remedies and got a 90-minute lecture on 17 different plants, their historical uses, and a demonstration involving a mortar and pestle that somehow ended with her accidentally discovering a new pain relief paste. It was a very effective paste," Vera noted. "It also turned everyone's hands purple for 3 days," Senna countered. "Side effects are part of scientific discovery," Vera said. They passed communal dining halls, storage buildings, workshops where crafters were making everything from weapons to furniture, and a building Senna identified as the library, where Thorn basically lives because he's obsessed with ancient texts and keeps finding prophecies that may or may not be relevant to anything. "Is he the one who predicted last week's snowstorm?" Kaelith asked, remembering Vera mentioning someone's weather prophecy. "No, that was just Thorn being nervous about clouds," Senna explained. "He sees omens in everything. Last month he was convinced the way birds were flying meant we were facing imminent doom. Turns out they were just migrating south like birds do every winter. But he was very concerned." Despite the humor, Kaelith could sense the affection underlying their words. This wasn't mockery. It was the way family talked about each other's quirks. Her old pack had never felt like this. Every interaction had been measured, careful, weighted with awareness of hierarchy and status. Omegas spoke to alphas with deference. Lower-ranked wolves avoided eye contact with those above them. Everyone performed their roles with rigid precision. Here, Senna, clearly not an alpha based on her energy, was casually teasing pack members while giving Kaelith a tour. Vera moved through spaces with authority that had nothing to do with physical dominance and everything to do with competence. And Malrik, from what Kaelith had seen, treated his pack like valued individuals rather than subordinates to be commanded. It was strange, confusing, and possibly the most appealing thing Kaelith had ever experienced. "Earth to little Omega," Senna said, waving a hand in front of Kaelith's face. "You went somewhere distant and thoughtful. We're approaching the interesting part of the tour, the part where I show you the thing most visitors never get to see." "Should I be concerned?" Kaelith asked. "Only if you have an irrational fear of wolves with extremely strong opinions about their living arrangements," Senna said mysteriously. She led Kaelith to a building at the edge of the main compound, smaller than the others, with windows that appeared to be reinforced, and a door that had scratch marks suggesting something with claws had opinions about entry. Senna knocked 3 times, paused, then knocked twice more in what was clearly a pattern. "That's the secret code," she explained. "Otherwise, they assume you're an intruder and express their displeasure loudly." "They?" Kaelith asked. The door swung open, revealing a young woman with storm-gray hair and tired eyes. She looked at Senna, then at Kaelith, then sighed with the exhaustion of someone who'd been dealing with complicated problems for far too long. "Please tell me you brought help," the woman said, "because 3 of them are currently engaged in a debate about sleeping arrangements that's been going on for 2 hours, and I'm about ready to let them work it out through combat. Luna, this is Kaelith," Senna introduced. "Kaelith, this is Luna. She runs our sanctuary for wolves who are healing from difficult pasts. Wolves who've been through a lot," Luna clarified. "They need extra patience and understanding. We rescue them from bad situations and help them recover. Most eventually rejoin normal pack life. Some need more time, and some," she gestured behind her where loud arguing in wolf form could be heard, "have very specific opinions about everything and express those opinions at maximum volume." Kaelith's Omega instincts, the ones she'd spent years trying to suppress because they'd never been valued in her old pack, suddenly flared to life. She could feel distress radiating from the building, the particular kind of emotional chaos that came from wolves who'd been hurt and were trying to protect themselves through aggressive boundary setting. "Can I?" she asked, gesturing toward the door. Luna and Senna exchanged glances. "They're not dangerous," Luna said carefully, "but they're not exactly friendly either. They've been through situations that made them distrustful of new wolves." "I understand that," Kaelith said quietly. "I spent 5 years in a pack that treated me like I didn't matter. I know what it's like to protect yourself by keeping everyone at a distance." Something shifted in Luna's expression. Recognition, perhaps, or respect. She stepped aside. "All right, but if one of them tries to bite you, don't take it personally. That's just Shadow expressing his feelings about strangers invading his space." The inside of the sanctuary was organized chaos. Multiple wolves in various forms occupying different corners and levels. Some were fully shifted, others in human form, and a few in that awkward in-between state that suggested they were still learning control. 3 wolves in the center of the room were indeed engaged in what could only be described as an aggressive negotiation about sleeping arrangements. They were positioned in a tense triangle, each one radiating territorial frustration. Kaelith moved slowly, making herself smaller, projecting calm rather than challenge. Her Omega instincts, usually dismissed as weakness, suddenly felt like exactly the right tool for this situation. "Hey," she said softly, settling onto the floor at a non-threatening distance. "I heard you're having some disagreement about sleeping spaces. That sounds frustrating." 3 pairs of eyes swiveled to focus on her with varying levels of suspicion. "I'm Kaelith," she continued in that same gentle tone. "I'm new here. I don't know the rules yet or how things work in this space, but I do know what it's like to feel like you don't have control over anything. So having control over where you sleep feels really important." One of the wolves, a lean gray one with scarred ears, shifted partially into human form. "Who are you?" His voice was rough, defensive. "Someone who spent years being told she didn't matter," Kaelith said honestly. "Someone who lost everything recently and is trying to figure out how to exist in a new place without losing herself." The gray wolf studied her for a long moment. Then, slowly, some of the tension bled out of his posture. "I'm Shadow," he said. "These idiots are Ash and Storm. We're arguing because the sleeping platform near the window is the best spot, and we all want it." "That does sound like a problem," Kaelith agreed. "Is there a way to share it? Or take turns? Or would that not work for some reason I'm not understanding?" "Sharing is weird," Ash, a smaller red-brown wolf, said. "But turning feels like giving up territory." "What if it's not about territory?" Kaelith suggested. "What if it's about cooperation? Like, you're strong enough that you don't need to fight over resources. You're secure enough to take turns because you know you'll get what you need eventually." The 3 wolves looked at each other. "That's..." Storm, the largest of the 3, paused. "That's actually not terrible logic. We could do a rotation," Shadow said slowly. 3 days each, fair and predictable. "I'm fine with that if you 2 are," Ash agreed. Just like that, the 2-hour conflict resolved itself. Behind Kaelith, she heard Luna make a small sound of disbelief. "How did you do that?" "I asked them what they actually wanted," Kaelith said simply, and suggested they were strong enough not to have to fight about it. Sometimes people just need someone to reflect back their own competence. Senna was grinning like she'd just witnessed something miraculous. "Oh, you're definitely staying. Luna's been trying to mediate that dispute for 2 hours. You did it in 5 minutes." "It wasn't that impressive," Kaelith protested. "It absolutely was," Luna said firmly. "I've been working with traumatized wolves for 3 years. What you just did, that understanding of what they needed emotionally, not just practically, that's rare. That's valuable." Shadow patted closer, studying Kaelith with those guarded eyes. "You smell like Omega," he observed. "But you don't act scared." "Being Omega doesn't mean being weak," Kaelith said. "It just means having different strengths. I spent a long time letting other people define what I should be. I'm done with that." "Good," Shadow said. Then, in a gesture that seemed to cost him something, "You can visit again if you want. You're not terrible company. Coming from a traumatized wolf who clearly trusted very few people, it was the highest compliment possible. As they left the sanctuary, Senna was practically vibrating with excitement. That was amazing. Do you have any idea how rare it is to find someone who can actually connect with the rescued wolves? Luna's good, but she has to work at it. You just understood them. I understood what it's like to feel powerless, Kaelith said quietly. That's not special. That's just empathy. That's exactly what makes it special, Vera said, having apparently followed them at some point. Most wolves lose their empathy when they gain power. You've had neither power nor respect, and you still maintain the ability to see others' pain. Malrik was right. You're exactly what this pack needs. I don't understand what's happening, Kaelith admitted. Yesterday I was burying my father with no future. Today I'm apparently some kind of Omega whisperer who's exactly what the pack needs. It's too fast. Too strange. Life changes fast sometimes, Senna said. The question is, does the change feel right? Or does it feel like another trap? Kaelith thought about the question carefully. About Shadow's tentative trust. About Malrik's respect for her choices. About laughing with Vera and Senna like friendship was a normal thing she was allowed to have. It feels terrifying, she said honestly. But not like a trap. Like possibility. Which is somehow scarier. That's because you're used to surviving, not living, Vera observed. Surviving means avoiding danger. Living means taking risks on things that might actually matter. It's uncomfortable if you're not used to it. Before Kaelith could respond, a howl split the afternoon air, not threatening, but urgent. All three women froze. That's the perimeter alert, Vera said, her entire demeanor shifting from friendly tour guide to deadly serious warrior. Someone's approaching who shouldn't be. And just like that, Kaelith's peaceful orientation day took a sharp turn toward complicated. The perimeter alert turned out to be significantly less dramatic than the urgent howl suggested, which Kaelith learned was a recurring theme at Winterkeep. It's probably just Derek again, Senna said as they jogged toward the main gates. He keeps forgetting the updated patrol schedule and triggers alerts when he returns from hunting at weird hours. It's not Derek, Vera said, her expression grim. Derek's howl sounds like a confused puppy. That was Thorn. And he only uses the urgent alert for actual problems. They arrived at the gates to find a small crowd gathered, and at the center of the commotion stood 3 wolves Kaelith didn't recognize. 2 were clearly guards, large, armed, and standing with military precision. The third was a woman in expensive traveling clothes, her dark hair elaborately styled despite the journey, her expression hovering somewhere between haughty and nervous. And behind them, looking deeply uncomfortable, was Malrik. I'm telling you for the 3rd time, Malrik was saying with the patience of someone whose patience was rapidly depleting. Winterkeep is not accepting new diplomatic envoys this season. We sent formal notification to all neighboring territories. Your presence here is a personal matter, not diplomatic, the woman interrupted, her voice carrying that particular tone of someone used to being heard and obeyed. I've come regarding your recent acquisition. Her eyes landed on Kaelith, and the disdain was immediate and obvious. Ah, the woman said. So the rumors are true. You did collect a stray Omega from the Whispering Pines territory. How charitable of you, Your Majesty. Kaelith felt Senna tense beside her. Vera's hand moved subtly toward the blade at her hip. Choose your next words carefully, Lady Morgana, Malrik said, and his voice had gone cold enough to freeze water mid-flow. Because insulting a member of my pack is a very quick way to find yourself escorted back across the border with significantly less courtesy than you arrived with. Lady Morgana had the sense to look slightly alarmed, but she rallied quickly. I meant no offense. I'm simply concerned about the implications of this situation. Kaelith Moonwhisper was previously under the protection of the Whispering Pines pack. Her sudden departure without proper notification has caused some concern among our leadership. Your leadership rejected her? Malrik said flatly. They offered her nothing when her father died except pressure to accept an unwanted bond. She owes Whispering Pines exactly nothing. Nevertheless, Lady Morgana pressed, there are protocols, expectations, an Omega of her bloodline. Has no bloodline of significance according to your own pack's assessment, Vera interrupted with lethal politeness. You classified her as low status, minimal value, unsuitable for advantageous bonding. I have the documentation if you'd like me to read it aloud for everyone's benefit. Lady Morgana's face flushed. That was simply practical classification. That was your pack deciding she didn't matter, Senna said, having apparently abandoned all pretense of diplomatic restraint. And now that an Alpha King has given her protection, suddenly you're concerned about protocols? That's fascinating timing. What do you actually want? Malrik asked tiredly. Because if this is an attempt to reclaim Kaelith for some newly discovered significant bloodline importance, the answer is no. If this is about extracting compensation for her departure, the answer is also no. And if this is just an excuse to gather intelligence about Winterkeep's internal affairs, the answer remains no, with added suggestion that you leave immediately. Lady Morgana drew herself up. I came to offer Kaelith the opportunity to return. Garrett Shadowpaw has generously agreed to honor his previous offer of bonding, despite her irregular departure. The pack leadership feels this would be the most appropriate resolution for everyone involved. The silence that followed was profound and deeply uncomfortable. Kaelith felt like she'd been punched in the stomach. They wanted her back? After years of treating her like she was invisible, except when she could be useful? After her father died with none of them offering real help? After she'd finally found somewhere that treated her like an actual person with value? No, Kaelith heard herself say, the word emerging stronger than she'd expected. Thank you for the offer, but no. Lady Morgana's eyebrows rose. You're refusing to return to your pack? To accept an honorable bonding offer from a respected warrior? I'm refusing to go back to a place that made me feel worthless every day I lived there, Kaelith said, feeling something fierce and warm building in her chest. Garrett's offer isn't generous. It's convenient for him. And I don't owe Whispering Pines my entire future just because I was born there. This is highly irregular, Lady Morgana said, looking to Malrik like he might override Kaelith's decision. Surely you understand the complications this creates? I understand that you've wasted everyone's time with a recruitment attempt disguised as diplomatic concern, Malrik said. Kaelith has made her choice clear. That's the only answer you're getting. Thorn, please escort Lady Morgana and her guards back to the border with all appropriate courtesy. Thorn, a massive wolf with kind eyes who'd been standing quietly at the edge of the crowd, stepped forward. Of course, Your Majesty. Lady Morgana, if you'll follow me. It wasn't a suggestion. Lady Morgana looked like she wanted to argue further, but even she could read the room well enough to recognize a losing situation. She gave Kaelith one last look of disdain, mixed with something that might have been confusion, then followed Thorn toward the gates. The moment she was out of earshot, Senna let out a long breath. Well, that was exciting. I give it a 7 out of 10 for dramatic tension. Would have been higher if she'd actually said something creative instead of just generic protocols and expectations nonsense. She seemed genuinely confused that you didn't want to return, Vera observed to Kaelith. Like she couldn't comprehend why anyone would choose Winterkeep over Whispering Pines. Because Whispering Pines is a terrible pack with delusions of significance, Senna said. Everyone knows that. They're like the annoying cousin who shows up to family gatherings and brags about accomplishments nobody cares about. Malrik moved closer to Kaelith, his silver eyes searching her face. Are you all right? I know that confrontation wasn't what you needed today. I'm fine, Kaelith said, then corrected herself. Actually, I'm better than fine. I just refuse to go back to a place that treated me terribly. That feels really good, actually. That's because standing up for yourself is powerful, Vera said, especially when you've spent years not being allowed to do it. Also because Lady Morgana's face when you said no was priceless, Senna added. She looked like she'd been slapped with a fish. Very satisfying to witness. Despite the tension of the confrontation, Kaelith found herself laughing. Slapped with a fish? It's a very specific expression, Senna said seriously. Surprise plus indignation, plus the dawning realization that things aren't going according to plan. Classic fish slap face. I need you to stop describing diplomatic incidents in terms of fish-based violence, Vera said. It's unprofessional. You literally just described documentation as something you'd read aloud for everyone's benefit in the most threatening tone I've ever heard, Senna countered. That's also unprofessional, but it was amazing, so I'll allow it. I contain multitudes, Vera said primly. Malrik shook his head, but there was affection in the gesture. My pack is completely ridiculous. Your pack just defended me without hesitation, Kaelith said quietly. That's not ridiculous. That's really extraordinary. Something warm flashed through Malrik's silver eyes. You're one of us now. That means we protect you. Even from fish-slap-faced diplomatic envoys bearing terrible offers. I'm never going to live down the fish-slap thing, am I? Kaelith asked. Absolutely not, Senna confirmed cheerfully. It's canon now. Lady Morgana will forever be known as the woman who got metaphorically slapped with a fish in Winterkeep's main courtyard. As they walked back toward the main compound, Kaelith felt something shift inside her, a loosening of old fears, a settling into this strange new reality. She'd stood up to her old pack. She'd chosen Winterkeep over familiar misery, and for the first time in longer than she could remember, she'd done it surrounded by people who treated her refusal as brave rather than foolish. Maybe Vera was right. Maybe she was learning the difference between surviving and actually living. It was terrifying, but it also felt like coming home. The days following Lady Morgana's failed recruitment attempt fell into a rhythm that Kaelith hadn't expected, but found herself grateful for. Mornings started with Senna appearing at her door with breakfast and enthusiastic commentary about whatever drama had unfolded overnight. Apparently, Winterkeep operated on a 24-hour schedule of mild chaos that included, but was not limited to, Marcus setting himself on fire, twice more, bringing his monthly total to 9.5. Someone's attempt to improve the communal kitchen that resulted in 3 ovens running simultaneously and producing bread that achieved sentience. And an ongoing debate about whether the training grounds needed expansion or if people just needed to stop practicing explosive techniques near structural supports. Thorne says we should consult the ancient texts about proper training ground dimensions, Senna reported one morning while Kaelith was still processing consciousness. Vera says we should use common sense and math. They've been arguing for 3 days. I've started taking bets on whether they'll resolve it through intellectual debate or eventually just arm wrestle for decision-making rights. Does arm wrestling solve many disputes here? Kaelith asked, accepting the tea Senna offered. More than you'd think. We're wolves. Sometimes the straightforward physical approach works better than hours of discussion. Plus, it's entertaining for spectators. Kaelith spent her afternoons in the sanctuary with Luna, working with the rescued wolves who were slowly learning to trust again. Shadow had become particularly attached, following her around the building and offering commentary on everything with the blunt honesty of someone who'd decided she was worth talking to. That new wolf who arrived yesterday is extremely suspicious of everyone, Shadow informed her one afternoon. He growled at Luna for 3 hours straight. Very rude. He's probably scared, Kaelith suggested gently. Sometimes fear looks like aggression when you don't know how to ask for help. Shadow considered this. That's annoyingly insightful. I hate when you're right about emotional things. You'll survive the trauma of my correctness, Kaelith assured him. Barely, Shadow muttered, but he was fighting a smile. The work was exhausting but satisfying in ways Kaelith hadn't experienced before. Every small breakthrough, a wolf accepting touch, a successful shift after weeks of being stuck in one form, someone finally sleeping peacefully instead of on constant alert, felt like evidence that she was actually contributing something meaningful. Luna noticed. You're a natural at this, she said one evening as they were closing up the sanctuary. The wolves trust you faster than they trust anyone else, including me. That's rare. I think they recognize someone who understands what it's like to feel disposable, Kaelith said. Maybe, Luna agreed, but it's more than shared experience. You have a gift for meeting them where they are instead of where you think they should be. That's skilled, not just instinct. The evenings were Kaelith's favorite time, though. After the sanctuary closed and before sleep claimed her, she'd often find herself in Winterkeep's central gathering space, a large hall with multiple fireplaces where pack members congregated to eat, talk, and generally exist in each other's company without formal structure. It was there that she learned the real rhythms of Malrik's pack. Vera held informal strategy sessions that were part planning and part entertainment, as pack members suggested increasingly creative solutions to logistical problems. What if we trained the ravens to deliver messages? Marcus, we've discussed this. The ravens are not interested in being our postal service. We haven't asked them nicely enough. Thorn read from ancient texts and got progressively more animated about prophecies that may or may not have been relevant. This passage clearly indicates that a wolf of unusual origin will bring balance during a time of transition. Thorn, that passage is about seasonal weather changes. Is it, though? Is it really? And Malrik himself moved through the space with easy authority, stopping to speak with pack members, settling minor disputes with practical wisdom, and occasionally joining the completely ridiculous debates with contributions that proved he had a sense of humor beneath the Alpha King exterior. I'm just saying, Marcus argued one evening, if I could control the fire better, we could heat the entire compound more efficiently. You set yourself on fire 9.5 times this month, Malrik pointed out. Your fire control is aspirational at best. 10 times now, Vera called from across the room. He did it again during afternoon training, both sleeves this time. Very symmetrical. That's progress, Marcus protested. Symmetry suggests improving control. That suggests you're equally bad with both hands, Senna countered, earning laughter from several nearby wolves. Kaelith watched these interactions with fascination. Her old pack had been rigidly hierarchical. Alphas spoke. Others listened. Suggestions from lower-ranked wolves were politely ignored. Here, Marcus could argue with his king about fire safety while admitting to his own incompetence, and no one treated it as disrespectful. It was like watching a family function. Chaotic, sometimes ridiculous, but fundamentally affectionate. You're thinking very seriously about something, Malrik's voice said beside her, and Kaelith startled slightly. She hadn't noticed him approaching. Just observing, she said. Your pack is very different from what I'm used to. Different good or different concerning? Malrik asked, settling into the seat beside her. Different wonderful, Kaelith admitted. I keep waiting for the other shoe to drop. For someone to remind me I'm just an Omega who doesn't really belong here. But it keeps not happening. That's because you do belong here, Malrik said simply. You've been helping Luna with the sanctuary wolves. Senna says you've memorized half the pack members' names already. Vera actually smiled yesterday when talking about you, which is how I know you've impressed her because Vera doesn't smile about people she's not invested in. Vera smiled about me? Kaelith asked, surprised. It was brief and she tried to hide it, but yes. You're fitting in, Kaelith. Not because you're trying to perform some role, but because you're genuinely yourself and people respond to that. Before Kaelith could figure out how to respond to that, a commotion at the hall entrance drew everyone's attention. Thorn burst in, looking more animated than Kaelith had ever seen him, waving what appeared to be an extremely old book. I found it, he announced triumphantly. The reference I've been searching for, the prophecy about the Moonwhisper line. The hall went very quiet very quickly. The what now? Senna asked. Thorn practically vibrated with excitement as he opened the ancient text. The Moonwhisper bloodline. It's mentioned in texts dating back 3 centuries. They were known as Bridgewalkers, wolves who could connect across boundaries that normally separated packs. Mediators, healers, communicators with animals and wolves alike. He looked directly at Kaelith, his eyes bright with discovery. Your family wasn't insignificant. They were legendary. And somehow that knowledge got lost or deliberately buried over generations. Kaelith felt like the floor had shifted beneath her. That's not possible. My father was just a craftsman. We were nobody. Your father was a craftsman who saved an Alpha King's life using skills most wolves don't have, Malrik said slowly. Who knew how to send messages through ancient channels? Who made sure his daughter would be protected even after death? That's not nobody, Kaelith. That's someone carrying on a legacy he may not have fully understood himself. This explains so much, Luna said from across the room. Why you're so naturally gifted with the sanctuary wolves. Why they trust you instantly. You're not just empathetic, you're literally bred for this kind of connection. Kaelith's mind was reeling. Her entire life she'd been told she was weak, insignificant, an omega whose only value was biological. And now Thorn was saying her bloodline was legendary. "I need air," she said abruptly, standing. I need to process this." She walked out into the cold night, wrapping her arms around herself, trying to integrate this new information with everything she'd believed about herself. Behind her, she heard footsteps. Malrik appeared beside her, not touching, but present. "This is a lot," he said quietly. "This is impossible," Kaelith corrected. "My pack evaluated me. They determined I had no significant bloodline, no special abilities, nothing that made me worth investing in." "Your pack was wrong," Malrik said firmly. "Or they deliberately suppressed information about your lineage because Bridgewalkers threatened their rigid hierarchy. Wolves who can connect across boundaries, who can mediate and communicate. That's power that doesn't rely on physical dominance. Some packs fear that." "So what does this mean?" Kaelith asked. "For me? For being here? For everything?" Malrik was quiet for a moment. Then, "It means you're even more remarkable than I already thought. And it means my wolf's recognition of you makes perfect sense. He saw what your bloodline carries, the ability to bridge, to connect, to heal. That's exactly what the Northern Reach needs." "Why?" Kaelith asked. "What does your pack need that's so important?" Malrik's expression turned serious. "That's something I need to discuss with you properly. Not tonight, when you're overwhelmed, but soon. Because if you're willing, if you choose to stay, there's something I need your help with. Something your gifts might be able to solve." "That sounds ominous," Kaelith observed. "It's complicated," Malrik admitted. "But not ominous. Just important, and potentially exactly what you were meant for." Kaelith looked up at the winter stars, thinking about bloodlines and legacies and the strange path that had led her from a frozen grave to an Alpha King's territory. "My life got very weird very fast," she said. "Embrace the weird," Malrik suggested. "It suits you." And despite everything, the overwhelming revelations, the uncertainty, the impossible nature of her current situation, Kaelith found herself smiling. Maybe weird was exactly what she'd been waiting for all along. The important, complicated thing that Malrik needed to discuss turned out to require a formal meeting, which Kaelith learned when Vera appeared at her door the next morning with an expression that suggested she was about to deliver news that ranged somewhere between mildly inconvenient and potentially life-altering. "The king requests your presence in the council chamber," Vera announced. "Which sounds ominous, but I promise it's just Malrik being formal because Thorn insisted we do this properly with witnesses and documentation." "Documentation of what?" Kaelith asked, still processing the concept of being summoned to a council chamber. "Your official acceptance into the pack, your bloodline revelation, and the proposal Malrik's been building up to for the past week," Vera said. "Wear something comfortable. The council chamber has excellent heating, but the chairs are terrible. Someone made them deliberately uncomfortable centuries ago as a strategy to keep meetings short, and we've maintained the tradition out of spite." 20 minutes later, Kaelith found herself seated in said uncomfortable chair, surrounded by what appeared to be Malrik's inner circle. Vera sat to her right, looking professionally bored. Thorn sat across from her, surrounded by ancient texts and looking like someone who'd had too much caffeine and too many prophetic revelations. Senna was there too, which surprised Kaelith until she realized Senna was probably present to provide comic relief during what was clearly meant to be a serious discussion. And at the head of the table sat Malrik, looking every inch the Alpha King in formal dark clothing, his white hair pulled back, his silver eyes serious. "Thank you for coming," Malrik began. "I know formal council meeting probably sounds intimidating, but this is essentially a conversation with witnesses, so that later no one can claim I coerced you or manipulated circumstances." "That's refreshingly direct," Kaelith observed. "I've learned that being straightforward saves time and prevents misunderstandings," Malrik said. "So let me be completely transparent about why you're here." He leaned forward slightly, his gaze intense but not threatening. "The Northern Reach has a problem. Several packs in our territory have been fragmenting, not through conflict or aggression, but through disconnection. Wolves are isolating, communication between groups is breaking down, and traditional bonds that used to hold communities together are weakening. It's not dramatic. There's no crisis, no immediate danger, but it's like watching a tapestry slowly unravel thread by thread. Why is that happening? Kaelith asked. Multiple reasons, Vera interjected. Generational trauma from past conflicts, shifts in how territories are managed, wolves forgetting how to maintain connections across distance, the usual slow erosion of community that happens when people get too focused on individual survival. We've tried traditional solutions, Malrik continued. More gatherings, better communication channels, incentives for interpack cooperation. Nothing has worked because the problem isn't logistical, it's emotional. Wolves have forgotten how to trust each other across pack boundaries. He paused, and something shifted in his expression. Then you arrived. And within days, you did something I haven't seen anyone accomplish in years. You connected with traumatized wolves who'd shut everyone else out. You mediated conflicts that had been ongoing for months. You made Shadow actually trust someone, which Luna said was borderline miraculous. Shadow's not that difficult, Kaelith protested. He just needs someone to see him as more than his trauma. Exactly, Malrik said. That's exactly what you do naturally. See wolves as more than their circumstances. That's Bridgewalker ability, Kaelith. The gift your bloodline carried. And it's precisely what the Northern Reach desperately needs. Kaelith felt her stomach do a complicated flip. You want me to… what? Travel around mediating disputes? I'm not trained for that. I don't have authority or credentials or… You have something better than credentials, Thorn interrupted, his eyes bright with excitement. You have genuine gift. The ancient texts describe Bridgewalkers as wolves who could walk between separated packs and remind them of their fundamental connections, not through force or demands, but through understanding and empathy. That sounds like a massive responsibility, Kaelith said carefully. It is, Malrik agreed, which is why I'm asking, not ordering. If you choose to do this, to travel with me to the different pack territories, to work with wolves who are struggling to maintain connections, you'd be doing something extraordinary. But it would also be demanding, sometimes frustrating, and definitely exhausting. What's the alternative? Kaelith asked. If I say no, then you stay here, continue working with Luna in the sanctuary, and live your life however you want, Malrik said simply. The protection I offer doesn't come with mandatory service. You're not obligated to save the entire territory just because you have a gift for connection. Senna, who'd been uncharacteristically quiet, chose that moment to speak. Can I offer some completely unsolicited perspective? Have you ever offered solicited perspective? Vera asked dryly. Fair point, Senna acknowledged. Kaelith, here's the thing. You spent years in a pack that told you that you didn't matter, that your gifts were irrelevant, that being Omega meant being insignificant. And now an Alpha King is literally asking you to help heal an entire territory because your abilities are exactly what's needed. She leaned forward, her expression unusually serious. You can say no. That's completely valid. But you should know that saying yes means proving to yourself, and to every wolf who ever dismissed you, that they were catastrophically wrong about your value. The words landed like stones in still water, creating ripples through Kaelith's carefully constructed defenses. That's manipulative, Kaelith said, but without heat. That's honest, Senna corrected. I'm not trying to manipulate you into saying yes. I'm trying to make sure you understand what yes would mean. Not just for the territory, but for you. You'd be reclaiming the legacy your bloodline carried. You'd be doing work that actually matters. And you'd be doing it because you chose to, not because someone forced you. Kaelith looked around the table. Thorn watched her with hopeful curiosity. Vera had that carefully neutral expression that suggested she'd support whatever decision Kaelith made. Senna looked encouraging but patient. And Malrik. Malrik looked at her like her answer mattered more than any territorial strategy or ancient prophecy. If I say yes, Kaelith said slowly. What would that actually involve? Specifically, travel to pack territories experiencing disconnection, Malrik explained. Spend time with wolves who are struggling. Use your gifts to help them remember how to communicate, how to trust, how to maintain bonds. I'd be with you. This wouldn't be you going alone into potentially difficult situations. We'd work together. And if I fail? Kaelith asked. If my gifts aren't enough to fix what's broken, then we try something else, Malrik said. Failure isn't catastrophic. Failure is just information about what doesn't work. The only real failure would be not trying at all because we were too afraid of imperfect results. Kaelith thought about Shadow, who'd trusted her when he'd trusted no one else. About the sanctuary wolves who responded to her presence. About her father, who'd saved an Alpha King's life just because it was the right thing to do. About the fact that for the first time in her entire life, someone was asking her to use her gifts instead of hiding them. I'll try, she heard herself say. I can't promise I'll succeed. I can't promise I'll be good at this. But I'll try. The smile that broke across Malrik's face was like sunrise. Sudden, warm, and transformative. That's all anyone can ask. Excellent, Thorn said, immediately making notes in one of his numerous books. This aligns perfectly with the prophecy about restoration through unlikely channels. Very satisfying narrative structure. Thorn, please stop narrating our lives like we're characters in your ancient texts, Vera said tiredly. But you are characters in history being written right now, Thorn protested. That's literally how time works. He's not wrong, Senna observed. Technically, everything we do becomes history eventually. That's a terrifying thought, Kaelith muttered. Welcome to living a consequential life, Vera said. It's uncomfortable but interesting. You'll adjust. The preparation for what Malrik called the territory circuit involved significantly more logistics than Kaelith had anticipated, which she discovered when Vera appeared with multiple lists and the expression of someone about to organize chaos into submission through sheer force of will. Travel pack, Vera announced, dropping a leather bag on Kaelith's bed. Warm clothes for unpredictable weather, practical boots that won't destroy your feet after 12 hours of walking, emergency supplies in case we encounter unexpected delays, and, most importantly, snacks. Never underestimate the power of having good snacks when you're trying to mediate disputes between stubborn wolves. Snacks are diplomatic tools? Kaelith asked. Snacks are everything, Vera said seriously. I once resolved a 3-month territorial disagreement by introducing both sides to honey cakes. Food creates common ground. Literally. Everyone has to eat, so sharing food reminds wolves they have fundamental needs in common. Over the next 2 days, Kaelith learned more about the Northern Reaches structure than she'd absorbed in her entire previous life. Malrik's territory encompassed 7 major pack groups, each with their own leadership, traditions, and increasingly isolated perspectives. The disconnection wasn't hostile. No one was actively fighting. But the slow erosion of trust and communication was creating invisible walls between communities that should have been allied. The Moonridge Pack stopped attending joint gatherings 2 years ago, Malrik explained during one of their planning sessions. They're not angry or rebellious. They just drifted, started focusing exclusively on their own territory. Now they barely acknowledge messages from other groups. And the Riverside Wolves are so focused on their fishing traditions that they've forgotten how to cooperate with the mountain packs on shared hunting grounds, Vera added. Not because they're selfish, but because they've lost sight of the bigger community picture. It's like watching a family slowly stop talking to each other, Senna observed. She'd invited herself to the planning sessions and provided commentary that ranged from helpful to completely ridiculous. Everyone's still technically related, but no one remembers why they should care about maintaining those relationships. Exactly, Malrik agreed. And traditional alpha authority doesn't fix it because the problem isn't disobedience, it's disconnection. I can't order wolves to care about each other. That has to come from genuine relationship building, which is where Kaelith's Bridgewalker gifts become relevant, Thorn said, appearing in the doorway with his arms full of books. The ancient texts describe Bridgewalkers as wolves who could see the threads that connect all packs and remind wolves to maintain those threads through active choice. It's beautiful metaphorical language that translates to practical relationship mediation. Thorn, why do you have 6 books? Vera asked suspiciously. Research materials for the journey, Thorn said innocently. Just light reading about historical precedents for territory healing and prophetic indicators of successful Bridgewalker interventions. You're not coming with us, Malrik said firmly. But I could provide valuable historical context. You could provide 6 books worth of constant commentary and references that make everyone's eyes glaze over, Vera interrupted. You're staying here to manage things while we're traveling. That's an honor, not a punishment. It feels like a punishment, Thorn muttered. But he set the books down with only mild protest. The night before their departure, Kaelith found herself unable to sleep, staring at the ceiling of her room and trying to process the massive shift her life had taken. 2 weeks ago, she'd been burying her father with no future. Now she was preparing to travel across territories as a Bridgewalker, helping an Alpha King heal community fractures. A soft knock on her door interrupted her spiral of thoughts. It's Malrik. His voice came through the wood. I saw your light still on. Can I come in? Yes, Kaelith called, sitting up and pulling a robe over her nightclothes. Malrik entered, and in the low firelight he looked less like an imposing Alpha King, and more like someone carrying the weight of significant responsibility with imperfect certainty. Couldn't sleep? He asked, settling into the chair near her fireplace. Too many thoughts, Kaelith admitted. I keep wondering if I'm going to fail spectacularly at this. If my gifts won't be enough. If the other packs will reject me because I'm just some unknown Omega with no credentials. Those are valid concerns, Malrik said. But let me offer some perspective. You helped Shadow trust again in less than a week. You mediated the sleeping platform dispute in 5 minutes. You made Luna, who's worked with traumatized wolves for 3 years, call your abilities borderline miraculous. That's not luck. That's genuine skill. What if it only works with sanctuary wolves? Kaelith asked. What if I can't replicate those results with regular pack members who have different problems? Malrik was quiet for a moment. Then, can I tell you what my wolf says about you? Kaelith nodded, curious despite her anxiety. He says you smell like home, Malrik said quietly. Not in a romantic sense, though there is that element, but in a fundamental sense. Like safety, like belonging, like the feeling of being truly seen. That's what Bridgewalkers carried, according to the old stories. The ability to make wolves remember what home feels like, what connection means. He leaned forward slightly. That's why I'm not worried about you failing. Because you carry something that goes deeper than learned skills or practiced techniques. You carry the ability to remind wolves of their fundamental need for each other, and that's exactly what's been missing. That's a lot of pressure, Kaelith whispered. It is, Malrik agreed, but you don't have to carry it alone. I'll be there. Vera will visit periodically to provide strategic support. Senna's probably going to show up uninvited at least twice. You have backup, Kaelith. This isn't you facing impossible odds alone. Why are you doing this? Kaelith asked suddenly. Not just honoring the debt to my father. That explains the rescue. But why invest this much time and energy into helping me become what my bloodline suggests I should be? Malrik's silver eyes held hers, and there was something vulnerable in them that she'd never seen before. Because my wolf recognized you as mate, he said quietly, and I'm starting to understand why. Not just because you're Bridgewalker bloodline, though that matters, but because you see me, actually see me, not just as Alpha King or powerful leader, but as someone trying to do right by his territory, while carrying doubts and uncertainties. He paused, looking almost uncertain himself. I'm not proposing a mating bond right now. You need time, space, freedom to choose without pressure. But I want you to know why I'm invested in your success. Because your success is my success. Your healing is my healing. And my wolf knew that before my human brain figured it out. Kaelith's heart was doing complicated things in her chest. That's really honest. I'm trying this new thing where I say what I actually mean instead of hiding behind formal authority, Malrik said with a slight smile. Vera says it's good for me. Thorn says it's prophetically significant. Senna says it makes me more relatable and less like a mysterious statue of leadership. I'm taking all that as encouragement. Despite her nerves about tomorrow, despite the weight of expectations, despite everything, Kaelith laughed, actually laughed, the sound genuine and warm. Your pack is ridiculous, she said. My pack is perfect, Malrik corrected, and you're part of it now. So rest, Kaelith Moonwhisper, Bridgewalker, and pack member. Tomorrow we start healing a territory. But tonight, you're just someone who deserves peaceful sleep. He stood, moved toward the door, then paused. For what it's worth, I believe in you. Completely. Then he left, and Kaelith was alone with her thoughts again. But this time, the thoughts felt less like anxiety and more like possibility. Tomorrow, she'd find out if she really was the Bridgewalker her bloodline suggested. Tonight, she was just Kaelith, someone who'd survived impossible circumstances and was brave enough to try something new. That felt like enough. The Moon Ridge Pack's territory sat at the edge of a valley where morning mist rolled through like living silver, transforming the landscape into something that belonged in ancient stories rather than current reality. Kaelith stood at the border with Malrik, staring at what should have been a thriving pack settlement, but instead looked like a collection of wolves who'd forgotten how to exist together. Houses were occupied but isolated. No smoke from communal fires, no sounds of shared meals, no wolves gathering in the open spaces that clearly existed for exactly that purpose. It was like watching a painting of community, where someone had carefully erased all the connecting lines between figures. They've been like this for 18 months, Malrik said quietly. Not hostile, not suffering obvious hardship, just separate. The pack leader, Rowan, says everything is fine, but you can see it's not. They're lonely, Kaelith said, feeling the emotional weight rolling off the territory like fog. They don't even realize how lonely they are because they've normalized the isolation. Can you help them? Malrik asked, and there was vulnerability in the question that made Kaelith's chest tight. I can try. They walked into Moonridge together, and the response was immediate. Wolves emerging from houses with expressions that cycled through surprise, suspicion, and something that looked almost like hope before being carefully suppressed. Rowan met them in what should have been a central gathering space, but was currently just an empty clearing. He was older, gray-haired, with tired eyes that suggested he'd been carrying weight alone for too long. Alpha King, Rowan said formally. We weren't expecting a visit. I sent word 3 weeks ago, Malrik said gently. But I understand messages sometimes get overlooked when you're managing territory. Something flickered across Rowan's face. Guilt, maybe, or embarrassment at having missed communication. This is Kaelith Moonwhisper, Malrik continued. She's a Bridgewalker. She's here to help, if you'll allow it. Help with what? Rowan asked, defensive walls immediately rising. Moonridge is functioning adequately. We meet our obligations, maintain our borders, cause no conflicts. You're surviving, Kaelith interrupted gently, but you're not thriving. And I think you know that. Rowan stared at her, and for a moment, the carefully maintained composure cracked. What would you know about it? I know what it's like to exist in a space where everyone is technically fine, but nobody's actually connected, Kaelith said. I know what it feels like to go through days without genuine interaction. I know how you convince yourself that independent functioning is the same as healthy community. And I know it's not. The words hung in the misty air like a challenge and an invitation simultaneously. You're Omega, Rowan said, like he was trying to find a reason to dismiss her. I'm Bridgewalker bloodline, Kaelith corrected, which means I can feel what your pack has lost. The threads that used to connect you are still there. They're just tangled and neglected. But they can be repaired if you're willing to acknowledge they need attention. And if I say we don't need outside intervention? Rowan asked. Then we leave, Malrik said simply. But before you decide, walk through your territory with honest eyes. Look at how your pack moves around each other like ghosts. Listen to how quiet it is when it should be full of conversation and laughter. Ask yourself if this is really the legacy you want to leave. A pack that functioned adequately but forgot how to actually live together. The silence that followed was profound and uncomfortable. Then, from one of the nearby houses, a young voice called out, "I'm lonely." Everyone turned to see a young wolf, maybe 16 or 17, standing in a doorway with tears streaming down her face and an expression of desperate courage. "I'm so lonely," she repeated, her voice breaking. "We're all lonely. We pretend we're fine, but we're not. I can't remember the last time someone asked how I was doing and actually wanted to hear the answer. I can't remember the last time we all ate together. I can't remember what it feels like to be part of something instead of just near it." Other doors opened. Other wolves emerged, and Kaelith could see the recognition spreading. The moment when everyone simultaneously realized they'd all been feeling the same isolation, but pretending they were fine. "Maya's right," an older woman said. "We've lost something. I don't know when it happened or how to fix it, but she's right. I miss gatherings," another voice added. "I miss knowing my neighbors. I miss feeling like I belonged to something bigger than just my own survival." Rowan looked around at his pack, at the cracks showing in the carefully maintained facade of adequate functioning, and something in him broke. Not destructively, but like ice melting after a long winter. "Help us," he said to Kaelith, and it was a plea rather than a request. "Please, I don't know how to fix this. I've tried, but everything I do just makes wolves retreat further. I'm failing them." Kaelith moved forward, guided by instincts she was only beginning to understand. "You're not failing. You're just trying to lead alone when this requires everyone to participate. May I?" She gestured to the empty gathering space, and Rowan nodded. "Everyone," Kaelith called out, her voice carrying with surprising authority. "Come here, right now. Don't think about it. Don't make excuses. Just come. Bring whatever you're doing. Bring your uncertainty. Bring your loneliness. Just come." And they came. Slowly at first, then with increasing momentum, wolves emerging from isolated houses and moving toward the gathering space like they'd been waiting for permission to connect. Within minutes, the clearing that had been empty was full of pack members standing in awkward clusters, not quite knowing what to do but present. "Sit," Kaelith said. "On the ground, in whatever configuration feels comfortable. Make a circle if that works, or multiple circles, or just a general mass of wolves occupying space together. The structure doesn't matter. The presence does." They sat. It was messy and disorganized and beautiful. "Now," Kaelith continued, settling onto the ground herself, "we're going to do something radical. We're going to actually talk to each other. Not about pack business or obligations or anything practical. About how you're actually feeling. About what you miss. About what you need." "That's not how pack leadership works," someone protested weakly. "Maybe that's the problem," Kaelith said gently. "Maybe we've confused functional hierarchy with emotional connection. You can have strong leadership and genuine vulnerability simultaneously. Watch." She looked directly at Rowan. "You're carrying this pack's well-being alone, and it's crushing you. You're terrified you're failing. You lie awake at night wondering if you're adequate to this responsibility. And you don't tell anyone because you think admitting struggle makes you weak." Rowan's eyes widened, but he nodded slowly. "That's not weakness," Kaelith continued. "That's honest leadership. And when you hide that struggle, you model isolation for everyone else. You teach your pack that connection is optional and vulnerability is dangerous. But that's not true. Vulnerability is how we actually know each other." She turned to Maya, the young wolf who'd first spoken up. "You're lonely, and you feel guilty about it because you think you should be satisfied with functional survival. But humans, wolves, we're built for connection. Loneliness isn't weakness. It's your spirit telling you something essential is missing." Maya nodded, tears still tracking down her face. "So here's what we're going to do," Kaelith said. "We're going to sit here together and share one true thing. Something you're feeling, something you need, something you miss. And everyone else is going to listen without judgment or trying to fix it. Just witness, just acknowledge, just be present. Can you do that?" The silence was heavy with uncertainty. Then Rowan spoke. "I miss my mate's laugh. She died 3 years ago, and I haven't heard genuine laughter in this territory since. I think I accidentally taught everyone that grief means silence. I'm sorry for that. The confession broke something open. One by one, wolves began speaking. I miss communal meals. I didn't realize how much until just now. I'm scared I've forgotten how to be a good packmate. I feel invisible most days, like I could disappear and nobody would notice. I want to matter to someone beyond just functional obligation. Each confession was met with nods, tears, recognition. The fog of isolation was burning away under the heat of honest connection. Kaelith sat in the center of it all, feeling the threads between wolves strengthening, remembering, reconnecting. This was Bridgewalker work, not fixing from outside, but reminding from within. Showing wolves they already had what they needed. They'd just forgotten how to access it. Hours passed. The mist burned away to reveal afternoon sun. And when Kaelith finally stood, every wolf in that circle looked different, lighter, more present, more alive. This is just the beginning, she said. Connection requires maintenance. It requires choosing each other daily. But you remember now what that feels like. Don't let yourselves forget again. Rowan approached her with tears in his eyes. Thank you. That's inadequate, but thank you. Thank Maya, Kaelith said. She had the courage to be vulnerable first. That's what started this. As they walked back toward the border, Malrik was quiet beside her. Finally, he spoke. That was extraordinary. You didn't impose solutions or demand changes. You just reminded them how to see each other. That's what Bridgewalkers do, Kaelith said, finally understanding her own gift fully. We don't build new bridges. We illuminate the ones that already exist and help wolves remember how to walk across them. My wolf was right about you, Malrik said quietly. You're exactly what we needed, what I needed. Kaelith looked up at him. This Alpha King who'd rescued her with 20 white wolves, who'd believed in her gifts before she believed in them herself, who was looking at her now like she was something precious and powerful and perfect. What happens now? She asked. Now? Malrik smiled. Now we visit 6 more territories. Now we heal a fragmented reach, one connection at a time. Now we figure out what my wolf recognized in you and what that means for both of us. He paused, then added softly, now we see if you're willing to stay. Not as obligation, not as duty, as choice, as home. And Kaelith, standing at the border between territories with mist curling around her feet, and an Alpha King looking at her like she hung the moon, felt something settle deep in her chest. I think I'm already home, she said. I just needed to figure out what home actually means. Malrik's smile was sunrise bright, hope-filled, and absolutely devastating. Then let's go build it together. There were 3 things Kaelith Moonwhisper knew with absolute certainty, 6 months after kneeling at her father's grave. First, that healing an entire territory was exhausting work that left you simultaneously drained and fulfilled. Second, that being Bridgewalker meant carrying other wolves' pain until they remembered how to carry it themselves. And third, that falling in love with an Alpha King was terrifying, wonderful, and absolutely inevitable. The journey through the remaining 6 territories had been a blur of emotionally intense moments that Kaelith would carry for the rest of her life. There was the elder in Riverside who'd wept openly when Kaelith asked how he was actually doing, not functionally, but genuinely, and who'd confessed he hadn't been asked that question in 3 years. His tears had started a chain reaction of vulnerability that transformed the entire pack's communication patterns within a week. There were the twins in High Peak who'd stopped speaking to each other after a misunderstanding years ago. Their silence calcified into something that felt permanent until Kaelith sat between them and translated their pain into words each could finally hear. They'd reconciled sobbing in each other's arms while their entire pack watched and remembered what forgiveness looked like. There was the young wolf in Frosthold who'd lived her entire life believing she was broken because her gifts didn't match traditional expectations, until Kaelith showed her that different didn't mean defective. I didn't know connection could feel like this, she'd whispered, and Kaelith had understood exactly what she meant. 6 territories, hundreds of wolves, countless moments of witnessing isolation transform into connection when someone finally illuminated the bridges that had always existed. And through it all, Malrik had been beside her, steady, supportive, and increasingly transparent, about what his wolf had recognized that first day in the frozen clearing. Now, standing in Winterkeep's central gathering space on the evening of the spring equinox, Kaelith was preparing for the conversation she'd been building toward for months. "You're nervous," Vera observed, appearing at Kaelith's elbow with 2 glasses of wine and the expression of someone who'd orchestrated this entire moment. "That's normal. Accepting a mate bond with an alpha king in front of the entire pack is nerve-wracking even when you're completely certain." "How did you know?" Kaelith started. "Because Malrik's been radiating hopeful anxiety for 3 days, and you keep touching that pendant your father made like it's a talisman for courage," Vera said. "Also," Senna told me, "she has zero concept of keeping secrets when she's excited." "I heard that," Senna called from across the room. "And it's true. I'm terrible at secrets. But in my defense, this is the most romantic thing that's happened in Winterkeep since... Actually, I don't think anything this romantic has ever happened here. We're making history." "Senna, please stop narrating emotional moments like you're documenting them for future generations," Thorne said, though he was literally taking notes. "That's my job." "You're both ridiculous," Malrik said, approaching through the crowd with the particular expression he wore when his pack was being chaotic, and he was simultaneously exasperated and fond. His silver eyes found Kaelith's, and everything else faded to background noise. "Can we talk?" he asked quietly. "Privately, before the formal gathering?" They slipped out to the balcony overlooking Winterkeep's valley, where moonlight painted everything in shades of silver and shadow. For a long moment, neither spoke, just existed together in comfortable silence that had taken months to build. "I need to say something," Kaelith said finally, "before you say whatever you've been preparing to say, because I need you to understand my choice is coming from clarity, not obligation or gratitude." Malrik nodded, his full attention focused on her. "6 months ago, I was kneeling at my father's grave convinced I had no value," Kaelith continued. "That being Omega meant being lesser, that my gifts were embarrassing quirks instead of actual abilities. You appeared with 20 white wolves and offered me choices when I'd been taught I deserved none." She took a breath, steadying herself. "I could be grateful for that without loving you. I could appreciate the opportunity without wanting to build a life with you. But that's not what's happening here. I'm not accepting a bond because I'm grateful or obligated or because your wolf recognized me first. I'm choosing you. Choosing this. Because you see me, all of me, and you don't flinch. Because your pack feels like home. Because I love you, Malrik Winterborne, even when you're being theatrical with magical wolves." Malrik's expression cracked into something vulnerable and radiant and absolutely devastating. "Say that again. I love you," Kaelith repeated stronger this time. "I choose you, not because of prophecy or bloodline or your wolf's recognition, though those matter, but because you're kind and strong and ridiculous, and you let your pack tease you about fire safety, and you believed in my gifts before I believed in them myself. I choose you because my heart chose you, and I'm finally brave enough to admit it. I love you," Malrik said, his voice rough with emotion. "I have been completely, catastrophically in love with you since you mediated that sleeping platform dispute in 5 minutes and made it look effortless. My wolf knew first, but my human heart caught up fast. I've just been waiting for you to feel safe enough to choose back. I'm choosing," Kaelith said, loudly and publicly, and without reservation. "If you'll have me." "If I'll have you," Malrik laughed, the sound bright with joy. "Kaelith Moonwhisper, Bridgewalker, and love of my extremely patient life, will you accept my bond? Will you stand beside me as mate and partner? Will you help me lead this territory and probably deal with Marcus setting himself on fire for the rest of our lives?" "Yes," Kaelith said simply. "To all of it, even the fire incidents." Malrik kissed her then, gentle and fierce and full of promise, tasting like hope and home and futures neither of them had dared imagine 6 months ago. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Kaelith noticed something strange. Howls were rising from the hills surrounding Winterkeep. Not threatening, welcoming. Familiar. "The White Guard," Malrik said, wonder threading through his voice. "They've returned." 20 white wolves lined the ridge above the compound, their silver eyes gleaming in moonlight, their song carrying across the territory like a blessing 3 centuries in the making. They'd appeared for a debt honored. Now they witnessed a bond chosen freely by 2 wolves who'd found each other through loss and magic and impossible circumstances. The formal bonding ceremony happened 3 days later under a full moon, with the entire northern reach present to witness. Pack leaders from all 7 territories came, including Rowan from Moonridge, who brought Maya and thanked Kaelith publicly for reminding his pack how to be a family. Even Lady Morgana sent a formal message acknowledging Kaelith's new status, the words dripping with barely concealed shock that the low-status Omega was now mate to an Alpha King. Kaelith found the message deeply satisfying, but it was the unexpected visitor that provided the most profound closure. Garrett Shadowpaw stood at Winterkeep's gates the morning before the ceremony, looking uncomfortable and out of place in a way that suggested he'd never truly understood any territory beyond his own rigid hierarchy. He'd come to check on her, he said. But Kaelith could see the truth. He wanted to understand how the Omega he'd considered suitable enough had become someone an Alpha King chose as mate. They walked the grounds together, Garrett's discomfort growing with each interaction he witnessed. Pack members greeting Kaelith with genuine affection, Shadow following her around like a devoted guardian, Vera consulting her on sanctuary expansion plans. "You're different," he said finally. "I'm the same," Kaelith corrected gently. "You just couldn't see me before." None of them could. They'd decided who I was based on Omega status without ever knowing my actual gifts or value. "I would have provided for you," Garrett protested weakly. "I know," Kaelith said, "and that would have been a life. But it wouldn't have been my life. It would have been existing in the shape someone else cut for me. This," she gestured at Winterkeep, at the wolves training in the distance, at Malrik watching from across the courtyard with that expression that suggested she was his entire world. "This is me actually living." Garrett studied her for a long moment. "I didn't understand what I was offering to lose. I'm sorry for that." "I'm not," Kaelith said honestly, "because losing that bond meant finding this one. Everything that hurt led me exactly where I needed to be." He left that afternoon, and Kaelith felt only peace about the closure. The night after the bonding ceremony, Malrik surprised her with moonroad travel to a familiar clearing. Kaelith stood at the edge of the Whispering Grove, staring at her father's grave. But this time, everything was different. The wooden marker she'd carved had been replaced with a beautiful stone monument, engraved with Marcus Moonwhisper's name and a simple phrase. "He saved a king and loved his daughter well." 20 white wolves lined the edge of the clearing like the honor guard her father should have had at his funeral. "He saved my life," Malrik said quietly, standing beside her. "And because he did, I found you. His legacy isn't just a pendant or a bloodline. It's everything we're building together. Every connection restored, every wolf helped, every bridge illuminated. That's his gift continuing through you." Kaelith knelt before the grave. But this time the earth was warm, the air smelled like spring instead of winter, and she wasn't alone or desperate or without hope. "Thank you, Papa," she whispered, pressing her hand to the earth. "For saving him, for saving me, for believing I was worth protecting, even when you couldn't be here to do it yourself, for being exactly who you were, someone who helped because it was right, not because it was profitable. I'm carrying that forward. I promise." The white guard howled softly, a song of honor, of debt fulfilled, of legacies recognized. Spring transformed Winterkeep into something alive and thriving. The sanctuary expanded under Luna's direction, with Kaelith designing a new wing specifically for teaching Bridgewalker practices to wolves who wanted to learn. Shadow was her first official student, his guarded heart now open enough to help others navigate trauma. Senna volunteered enthusiastically, though her methods remained chaotic and involved significantly more humor than traditional teaching. Even Thorn contributed, digging through ancient texts for forgotten wisdom about connection and community healing. "Bridgewalker isn't a title," Kaelith told her students during their first formal session. "It's a practice. Choosing connection every day, even when it's hard. Seeing wolves not as they appear, but as they could be. Believing that bonds matter more than hierarchy. That's what my father taught me by example, That's what I'll teach you through practice. Marcus attended too, because he'd decided that understanding emotional connection might help him stop setting himself on fire. It didn't work, but everyone appreciated the effort. The 7 territories slowly transformed from isolated communities into a genuinely connected network. Not perfect. Connection required constant maintenance, but alive in ways they hadn't been in years. Bridgewalkers in training traveled between packs, maintaining relationships, reminding wolves to choose each other. And through it all, Kaelith and Malrik built a life that honored both their responsibilities and their relationship. They led together, him with strategic wisdom, her with emotional intelligence, both with deep love for the wolves they served. There were 3 things Kaelith Winterborne knew with absolute certainty 1 year after kneeling at her father's grave. First, that love, real, chosen love, felt like coming home to a place you'd been searching for your entire life without knowing it existed. Second, that her father's greatest gift hadn't been the pendant around her neck, though she still wore it every day. It had been teaching her that helping others wasn't transactional. It was simply what good wolves did. And third, that being Bridgewalker meant carrying a legacy forward while building a new one simultaneously. Honoring the past while creating a future. Remembering where you came from while embracing where you were going. She stood on Winterkeep's highest balcony on the anniversary of her father's death, watching the sunset over territories that now thrived with genuine connection. Malrik's arms wrapped around her from behind, his warmth a constant reminder that she was loved, valued, and exactly where she belonged. "Thank you," she whispered, to her father, to the moon goddess, to whatever force had guided 20 white wolves to a frozen clearing exactly when she'd needed them most. "For what?" Malrik asked, pressing a kiss to her temple. "For everything," Kaelith said simply. "For this life. For you. For reminding me that sometimes the worst moments lead to the best transformations." In the distance, a wolf howled, not mourning, but celebrating. Other voices joined, creating a song of pack, of connection, of wolves choosing each other across distances that had once felt impossible to bridge. Kaelith howled too, her voice rising with Malrik's and their packs, a declaration that she was here. She was home, and she was exactly who she was meant to be. The Bridgewalker who'd started kneeling in frozen mud and ended standing beside an Alpha King, healing territories one connection at a time. The Omega who'd been called worthless and became irreplaceable. The daughter who'd honored her father's legacy by living fully, loving deeply, and choosing connection even when isolation would have been easier. She was Kaelith Winterborne, and her story, their story, was just beginning. The end. Did Kaelith and Malrik's story touch your heart? I want to hear from you. Comment below telling me your name and which city you're watching from, and what was your favorite moment in this story. And here's our secret code so I'll know you stayed until the very end. Comment the phrase, 20 white wolves brought me home, and I'll know you're part of our pack. If you loved this emotional journey of rejection to redemption, of loneliness to belonging, subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell. I post new supernatural romance stories every single day, and I don't want you to miss a single chapter. Thank you for being here, for listening to this story, and for being part of this amazing community. You're not just viewers, you're my pack, and I'm so grateful for each and every one of you. Until tomorrow's story, remember, you're never too broken to be loved, never too lost to find home, and never too different to be extraordinary. I'm Maggie Reed, and I'll see you in the next chapter.